My name is Marin Holloway. I'm 34. And on the morning I became an American citizen, my mother stayed home and told the family I didn't deserve it. She said it at breakfast, over eggs, to my stepfather, my sister, and my sister's husband. She said the words out loud in the kitchen I grew up in, the kitchen where she taught me how to pronounce Worcestershire when I was 10. And then she went upstairs and turned on the shower so she wouldn't have to hear the door close when my stepfather walked out. I wasn't there. I was already in Hartford. I was sitting in row 4 of the federal courthouse ceremony room, holding a small paper flag in my lap, looking at the empty folding chair to my left. Row 4, seat 7, the seat I had reserved for her 8 months in advance. A woman 2 rows behind me, somebody's grandmother, in a coat too warm for the building, leaned forward and tapped my shoulder. She had a stack of small American flags in her hand. She gave me one for myself. And then, without asking, she leaned across the aisle and placed a second one on the empty chair beside me. She smiled at me like she thought she was doing something kind. I didn't tell her the chair was empty for a reason. I want to tell you something before we go any further. I am a civil engineer. I spend my life calculating what a structure can carry before it fails. Bridges, floor systems, load paths. I know exactly how much weight a thing can hold before the cracks start to show. And what I have learned after 25 years inside that family is that some loads don't break you because they're heavy. They break you because they are placed exactly where you cannot brace for them. My mother didn't yell at me that morning. She didn't write me a letter. She didn't even call. She just stayed home, and she told the people who loved her that I had chosen to become something she could not respect. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the room she refused to walk into that day, the floor she refused to set foot on, the building where I would raise my right hand and swear my oath, I had spent 3 years of my life helping to build. I'm Marin. Welcome to Hidden Family Revenge. Subscribe if you've ever sat in a room you built in a country you chose, next to a chair that was supposed to hold the person who taught you the word that started all of this. This is what happened, and what I did next she didn't expect. I came to Ashford, Connecticut when I was 9 years old. My mother, my biological mother, had died 18 months earlier in Cape Town. My father, who I will not be talking about much in this story because he is not the point, made arrangements for me to live with his sister's family in the States. That arrangement fell through in a way I won't describe. Within 6 months, my father had remarried by phone to a woman from his old college named Lorraine Voss and put me on a plane. The first thing Lorraine ever said to me in the arrivals hall at JFK was, "You must be exhausted, sweetheart. Let's go home." I want you to hear that sentence the way I heard it then. I was 9. I was carrying a backpack with 1 stuffed elephant and 3 sweaters my aunt had packed because she said America was cold. I had not slept in 22 hours. And a woman I had never met before said the word home to me like it was already mine. I loved her for that sentence for the next 25 years. This is the part of the story I have to tell you carefully, because if I don't tell you carefully, the rest of it won't land the way it should. Lorraine was not a monster when I was 10. She wasn't. There was a spelling bee that year. 5th grade regional, the kind with a microphone and a folding stage in the school gym. The list had Worcestershire on it. I came home crying because I could not get my mouth around the syllables. Lorraine sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of index cards and a black Sharpie and wrote out the word in pieces. Worcester. Sheer. She made me say it out loud after dinner every single night for 3 weeks. She did not miss one night, not one. I won the spelling bee. And in the parking lot afterward, while my stepfather Dale was getting the car, Lorraine knelt down in front of me. And she put both hands on my shoulders and she said, "You're mine now. I have carried that sentence inside me my whole life. I want you to remember it. You're going to hear it again. Here is you to understand about the years that followed. Lorraine did not love me the way you love a daughter. Lorraine loved me the way you love a project, the way you love a thing you have rescued. And for a very long time, I was grateful to be the thing she rescued because I was 9 and I was alone, and gratitude was the only currency I had. I want to give you 3 examples. I want to be specific because vague does not do justice to what I lived through. The summer I turned 19, I took out a private loan for $11,000 to cover the gap in my college tuition that her insurance plan was supposed to cover. The insurance plan had lapsed, She had forgotten to renew it. She told me I should be grateful she even tried. I paid that loan off myself over 6 years. When I was 26, I wired her $4,200 for what she called a roof emergency on the Ashford house. 3 months later, my sister Piper posted photos from a cruise. When I was 31, I co-signed a personal loan for her in the amount of $18,000 because the church needed a new sound system, and Lorraine had promised to lead the fundraising. The fundraising did not happen. The loan came back to me. I paid it down quietly for 2 years before I told my husband. And reader, at the time, I did not have a husband. I had a man named Hugo Alarcon, who I had been dating for 14 months, and who I had not yet been brave enough to introduce to my family. That's the other thing I should tell you. Hugo is the reason I am sitting here today able to tell this story without my voice shaking. Hugo is an immigration attorney who, on the day we met at a Build Connecticut fundraiser in New Haven, asked me one question that nobody in my life had ever asked me. He asked, "Why do you talk about your green card like it's a favor someone did for you?" I didn't have an answer. I had been a green card holder for 16 years. I had let it lapse and renewed it twice. I had never, in all that time, applied for citizenship. Lorraine had told me, gently, repeatedly, that there was no rush, that I was already family. That paperwork didn't change anything important. I had believed her. In December of the year I turned 33, I filed my N-400. I did it on my lunch break at work, on a laptop in a coffee shop on Chapel Street. I did not tell my mother. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. I know now there was no right moment. There was only the moment I stopped waiting for her permission. There's one more thing I have to tell you before we go further. In my closet, on the top shelf, in a green shoebox with the lid taped down, there is a stack of 43 index cards. They are 25 years old. The Sharpie has faded to gray. On the front of every card is a syllable: Worcester, sheer sauce. On the back of one of them, in Lorraine's handwriting, are the words, "You'll need this for when you become one of us." I had not opened that box in 15 years. I would open it again the night before my ceremony. And what I read on the back of that card would be the reason I did not call her. I want to take you back to a Saturday in early March. It was unseasonably cold, the kind of cold where the sidewalks have a thin shine on them and you can hear your own footsteps from a block away. I had driven up from New Haven to Ashford for what was supposed to be a casual lunch at my parents' house. I had with me, in my purse, a printed copy of my interview notice from USCIS. The interview was 4 weeks away. The ceremony, if I passed, would be 2 weeks after that. I had decided that morning, while drying my hair, that I was going to tell them. I want to describe the kitchen for you, because the kitchen matters. The countertop was the same butcher block Lorraine had picked out the year I turned 12. There was a bowl of clementines on the island. The coffee maker was making the sound it makes when the carafe is almost empty. Dale was at the table, doing the crossword in pencil, the way he has done the crossword in pencil for 40 years. Lorraine was at the stove, with her back to me, stirring something in a small saucepan. I remember the smell. It was lemon and butter and rosemary. She was making the sauce she always made for chicken. I sat down at the island. I unfolded the USCIS letter. I slid it across the counter toward Dale. I said, "I have my interview in April. The ceremony is in May. I'd like both of you to come." Dale picked up the letter. He read it. He looked at me. He looked at the back of his wife. He said, "Lore, honey, Marin has news." She did not turn around. She kept stirring. The wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pan in a slow circle. I counted the circles. There were 4 of them before she spoke. I counted them because I have always counted things when I'm scared. She said, "I heard her. I waited. I want you to understand that I was already, in that moment, doing a calculation. I was checking the structure. I was looking for the load path. I was asking myself, where is this going to land?" She turned off the burner. She set the spoon on the spoon rest. She turned around. She was wearing the apron with the small embroidered hens on it that I had given her for Christmas the year I graduated from grad school. She looked at me across the kitchen and her face was perfectly calm. She said, "Marin, I want you to think very carefully about what you are doing." I said, "I have thought carefully. I've been thinking for 16 years. She said, "You are not the kind of person who needs to do this." I want to stop the scene here for a second, because the next thing she said is the thing I have replayed in my head 1,000 times, and I want you to hear it the way she said it, which was not loud and not angry. but with the calm, soft, deeply concerned tone of a woman who believed every word that was about to come out of her mouth. She said, "Sweetheart, you already have us. You already have this country. You already have everything that piece of paper would give you. The only reason a person does this at your age is because they are trying to prove something. And I don't understand who you are trying to prove it to." Dale, behind her, said, "Lore." She held up one hand without looking at him. She kept her eyes on me. She said, "If you do this, Marin, you are saying that what we gave you wasn't enough." I felt the kitchen become very small. I felt the counter under my hand become very cold. I felt the place in my chest, the load-bearing place, the place that had carried 25 years of being grateful, begin to shift the way a beam shifts before it cracks. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I want you to know that because I want you to understand what it cost me. I said, "I would like both of you to be at the ceremony," she said. "I will think about it." She turned back to the stove. She turned the burner back on. The sauce as hissed. There was a sound behind me. It was Dale standing up from the table. He did not say anything. He walked past me. He went out the back door, the one that leads to the garage. The screen door clapped against the frame. I heard the garage door open. I heard the radio he keeps out there. Click on, mid-song, country station. I sat at the island for another 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the clock on the microwave. The clementine smelled like the kitchen of my childhood. The sauce was burning slightly at the edges of the pan, and she was not turning it down. I waited to see if she would turn it down. She did not. I picked up my USCIS letter. I folded it back along the creases. I put it in my purse. I stood up. I said, "I love you, Mom. The interview is April 3rd. The ceremony is May 17th. I hope you will come." She did not turn around. I drove back to New Haven with the radio off. I stopped once at a rest area on I-91, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, and I did not move and I did not cry. I called Hugo. He picked up on the second ring. I said, "I told them." He said, "And?" I said, "She thinks I'm trying to prove something." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said one sentence to me, and I want you to hear this sentence, because it is the first time in my life anybody had ever said anything like it to me out loud. He said, "Marin, you are trying to prove something. You're trying to prove it to yourself. And that is the only person who ever needed to hear it." I sat in that rest area parking lot for another 10 minutes. And then I drove home. What I did not know yet, what I would not find out for another 6 weeks, was that the day after that conversation in the kitchen, my mother called the pastor's wife at First Presbyterian and told her, in a voice low enough to sound concerned, that she was worried about me, that I was choosing to do something that would break my family, that I had always been, in her words, a little ungrateful, that she had done her best with a difficult child who had come to her from a hard country. By the time I found out what she had said it to 17 people. I want to walk you through the 6 weeks between that Saturday in the kitchen and the morning of the ceremony. Because those 6 weeks are where the structure of my life, the one I had spent 25 years bracing, finally began to come apart in places I had not engineered for. The first crack came on a Tuesday, 8 days after the kitchen conversation. I was in my office in New Haven reviewing fatigue calculations on the steel deck of a pedestrian bridge over the Quinnipiac River. My phone rang. It was Piper, my sister, Lorraine's biological daughter, 3 years younger than me. We had grown up in the same house and we had not in any real sense grown up together. Piper said, "Hey, listen, Mom doesn't want you to do the citizenship thing. She thinks it's an insult to the family she gave you." I said, "Piper, did she ask you to call me?" Piper said, "She didn't ask. She's just upset. I thought you should know." I said, "Okay, thank you for telling me. I'm going to do it anyway." Piper said, "Marin, come on. Don't be like this. You already have everything. Why make it weird?" I want to be honest with you. There was a part of me in that moment that wanted to scream at my sister. There was a part of me that wanted to list, by year and by dollar amount, every single thing I had paid for, fixed, covered, or absorbed for the family that had, in her words, given me everything. I didn't. I said, "I love you, Piper. I'll see you at the ceremony if you decide to come," and I hung up. She did not call back for 3 weeks. The second crack came the following Sunday when I overheard a phone call I was not supposed to hear. I had stopped by the Ashford house to drop off a casserole dish I had borrowed at Christmas. Lorraine was on the cordless phone in the den. The den was off the kitchen. She did not know I was in the house. Was standing in the kitchen with the casserole dish in my hand, and through the open door, I heard her say to whoever was on the other end of the line, "She's choosing to become American." I find that very telling, Marcy. She's been with us since she was 9, 25 years, and now suddenly she needs a piece of paper to feel like she belongs. I don't know what we did wrong. I stood in that kitchen with the casserole dish in my hand for a full 90 seconds. I could see on the counter the bowl of clementines from the week before. Some of them had started to go soft. I set the casserole dish down on the counter very quietly. I walked out the front door. I drove home. That night, Hugo came over with takeout from the Vietnamese place on State Street. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, and he watched me eat, and he didn't say anything for a long time, and then he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to call her and ask her to stop." He said, "Will that work?" I said, "No." He said, "Then what do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the spelling bee. I thought about Worcestershire. I thought about the apron with the little hens on it. I thought about every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every loan, every casserole, every time I had walked into that kitchen with my hands full and walked out with them empty. I said, "I want to keep going. I want to do the ceremony. I want her to come, and if she won't come, I want her to be the one who has to explain why." Hugo nodded. He said, "Okay. Then that's what we do." I want to tell you about Hugo's mother for a second, because she is going to come back at the end of this story, and I want her in your head now so the ending lands. Hugo's mother, Esperanza Alarcón, came to the United States from Honduras when Hugo was 4. She did not become a citizen until Hugo was 28. Hugo had been a citizen since birth. The day his mother was sworn in, he flew home from law school to be there. He told me, sitting at my table that night, that he had cried so hard during her oath that the woman next to him handed him a tissue and said, "Honey, it's not your ceremony." And Hugo had said, "Ma'am, with respect, yes it is." I held that story in my hands like it was something fragile. I am holding it still. The third crack came 2 weeks before the ceremony. I had passed my interview. The notice for the oath had arrived. I had reserved 4 seats for guests: Lorraine, Dale, Piper, and Piper's husband Beckett. The reservation was free, but it required a name on each chair. I had submitted the names 8 months earlier, the day after I filed my N-400. In a moment of optimism, I would later look back on the way an engineer looks back on an early design assumption that turned out to be wrong. I drove up to Ashford on a Saturday afternoon to deliver the 4 printed invitation cards in person. I wanted to hand them to her. I wanted her to take it from my hand. I wanted to make it impossible for her to claim later that she hadn't known. She was at the church when I got there. The First Presbyterian Women's Group was doing a spring food drive, and Lorraine, as choir director and informal queen of the basement fellowship hall, was running it. I parked in the church lot. I walked in through the side entrance. I could hear her voice before I saw her. She was at the long folding table in the middle of the hall, sorting cans of green beans into boxes, talking to Pastor Linwood Gage and his Marcy. There were maybe 20 other women in the room. Several of them I had known since I was 10. I want to tell you exactly what she said. I want to tell you because I heard it from 40 feet away from the back of the room before any of them noticed I had come in. She said, "Marcy, I just don't think you really know how a child like that comes to you. She was 9 years old. She had nothing. She had a father who didn't want her, and we took her in. We gave her a home. We gave her a country. And now she's filing paperwork that says, in writing, that what we gave her wasn't enough. She's going to a courthouse in a few weeks to sign a document that says she chooses this country, as if she hadn't been given it, as if it hadn't been given to her by us." Pastor Gage said something I couldn't hear. Lorraine said, "I love her. Of course I love her. But I'm not going to pretend to celebrate a piece of paper that exists because she decided what we gave her wasn't real." I had been standing in the doorway for 40 seconds. Marcy Gage looked up and saw me. Her face went the color of the cans of green beans on the table. She said, in a voice you could hear in the back row of a sanctuary, "Lorraine." My mother turned around. She saw me. Her face did not change. Not one muscle. She said, "Marin, sweetheart, I didn't know you were coming." I walked across the fellowship hall floor. I had the 4 invitation cards in my hand. I walked up to the folding table, and I set the 4 cards down on top of a stack of canned green beans. I looked at her. I did not look at Pastor Gage or Marcy or any of the other women in that room, even though I could feel all of them watching me. I said, "These are for the ceremony." May 17th, 2 o'clock. Federal Courthouse, Hartford. I would like all 4 of you to come. She said, "Marin, we should talk about this privately." I said, "We don't need to. I just wanted to make sure you had the cards. You have my number if you decide to use them." I turned around. I walked out of the fellowship hall. I drove back to New Haven. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I made it as far as the Q Bridge before I had to pull over. I sat on the shoulder for 10 minutes with my hazard lights on. And I did not cry, but I did do something I had not done in 25 years. I picked up the phone and I called the man who is biologically my father in Cape Town, and I said, "Do you remember when you put me on the plane?" And he said, "Yes, Marin, I remember." And I said, "Did you know what you were sending me to?" And he said, and his voice was very old and very tired and very honest, "I knew she would not love you the way your mother did. I hoped she would love you in a way that was enough. I did not have another plan." I said, "Okay." And we hung up. I drove home. Here is what happened in the 2 weeks after that. Piper called me 11 days before the ceremony and told me that Mom had decided not to come. She said it like she was reporting the weather. She said Mom didn't want to make it bigger than it was. She said Mom thought it would be more dignified if she stayed home and let me have my moment. I said, "Piper, will you come?" Piper said, "I think I should stay with Mom." I said, "And Dale?" Piper said, "He'll do what Mom does." I said, "Okay. Thank you for letting me know." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour. Hugo found me there at 6 p.m. He had let himself in. He sat down across from me. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "There's something I have to tell you. Director Tavares called me this morning. She wants you to speak at the ceremony. I want you to understand what that meant." Marisol Tavares was the regional USCIS director for Connecticut. She and I had been working together for almost 2 years on the structural retrofit of the federal courthouse in Hartford, the very building where my ceremony would be held. The USCIS field office occupied the 3rd floor of that courthouse. I had spent 18 months of my life walking that floor with a clipboard and a hard hat. I had been the one who flagged the column on the north wall that needed reinforcement before the load of the new file storage system could be added. I had stood in the ceremony room, the very room, 6 months before during an after-hours inspection and tested the seismic anchoring of the dais. Director Evers had only realized, 2 weeks before my own ceremony, that the M. Holloway on the citizenship list was the M. Holloway on her contractor roster. She had called Hugo because she didn't have my personal number. She wanted to know if I would say a few words at the ceremony. A short remark, 2 minutes. As the engineer who had helped build the room, I would be sworn in inside. I said to Hugo, "She doesn't want me to come." Hugo said, "Who, Tavares?" I said, "My mother." Hugo said, "Yeah." I gathered. I sat there for a long time. I said, "She thinks I'm trying to prove something." Hugo said, "Marin, you are an engineer who is about to swear an oath in a building she helped design. Of course you are trying to prove something. The question is who you are trying to prove it to. And I will say this only one time, and then I will never say it again. You do not owe Lorraine a smaller version of yourself so that she can keep being the bigger one. I want to tell you what I did that night because it is the moment everything changed, even though it did not look like anything at the time. I went into my bedroom. I climbed onto the chair in my closet. I reached up to the top shelf. I pulled down the green shoebox with the lid taped shut. I sat on the floor of my bedroom in my work clothes with the box in my lap, and I cut the tape with a kitchen knife, and I opened the lid. The flashcards were still there. 43 of them. The Sharpie had faded from black to gray, Worcester, sheer, sauce. I read each one out loud to myself like I was 10 years old again. I got to the one near the bottom, the one I had not remembered until that moment, and I turned it over. On the back, in my mother's 25-year-old handwriting, were the words, "You'll need this for when you become one of us." I read it 3 times. I closed the box. I taped the lid back down. I put the box on my bed. I went into the living room. I opened my laptop. I opened the email I had drafted to Director Tavares, the one declining the speaking slot, the one I had been holding in my drafts folder for 16 hours. I deleted the draft. I wrote a new email. It was 2 sentences. It said, "Director Tavares, I would be honored to speak. Thank you for asking, Marin." I hit send. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. For the first time in 6 weeks, I slept through the night. I want to slow down here because the morning of the ceremony deserves its own space, and what happened before I left the apartment deserves to be told the way it happened. I woke up at 5:45. I had set my alarm for 6. I lay in bed for 15 minutes, looking at the ceiling and listening to the radiator clank the way it had clanked every morning I had lived in that apartment. And I thought about nothing in particular. I thought about the weight of my own body on the mattress. I thought about the way the light comes in through the blinds in the spring, sharper than in winter. I thought about Hugo, who was asleep in the other room because he had stayed over on the couch because I had asked him to. I got up, I made coffee, I drank it standing at the window. At 7, I put on the dress I had chosen 3 months earlier. It was navy blue. Simple. The kind of dress my mother would have approved of, which I noticed and then chose not to think about. At 7:30, Hugo and I left the apartment. We drove to Hartford, 48 minutes on I-91. We did not say very much. Hugo had a small American flag in his lap, the kind you buy at a hardware store the week before the 4th of July. He had brought it for me. He was going to give it to me after the oath. We got to the courthouse at 8:45. The ceremony was at 10. I had to be inside with the other candidates by 9:15. I want to tell you what it felt like to walk into that building that morning. I had walked into it 300 times. I knew the security guards by name. I knew which elevator was slow and which one had been refurbished the year before. I knew the load capacity of the lobby floor. I knew that the marble facing on the east wall had been added in 2019 because the architect wanted the building to feel, in his words, more solemn. That morning, I walked through the metal detector, and the guard, his name is Eddie, his daughter is in college in Vermont, looked up at me, and his face did something I had never seen it do before. He smiled at me. He said, "Today's a good day, Miss Marin." And I had to look at the floor for a second so I would not start crying in the lobby of a building I had helped to build. I went upstairs. I took my seat, row 4, seat 8. I had given them 4 seats, Lorraine, Dale, Piper, Beckett. Row 4, seats 3, 4, 5, and 6. I had taken seat 8 for myself, leaving seat 7 empty between me and where Lorraine was supposed to sit, the way she had always sat next to me at every event of my childhood. Never quite shoulder to shoulder, always with a small buffer of space the way she liked it. At 9:55, I looked at the 4 empty chairs to my left. Not one of them had a person in it. At 9:58, the woman 2 rows behind me leaned forward and tapped my shoulder. She gave me a small paper flag. She leaned across the aisle. She placed a second flag on the empty chair beside me. She smiled at me. I smiled back. And then the doors at the back of the room closed, and the bailiff said, "Please rise," and the ceremony began. I want to tell you what it is like to stand in a room with 200 people who have all chosen to belong to a country. The room itself was not beautiful. The room was a federal multi-purpose ceremony hall on the 3rd floor of the Hartford courthouse, with acoustic tile on the ceiling and industrial carpet on the floor, and the kind of low ambient hum that you only notice if you have spent 18 months walking the building at night with a clipboard. The dais was set up at the front. There was a podium. There was an American flag full-size on a stand to the left of the dais. There were 200 folding chairs, 10 rows of 20, arranged in 2 banks with a center aisle. There was a banner that said, "Welcome New Americans," in red, white, and blue letters that I knew, because I had been on the procurement committee, had cost the federal government $240. The people in the room, though. The people in the room were the room. I want to tell you about a few of them because they are part of this story even though they do not know it. In row 1, seat 4, there was a man in his late 60s wearing a brown suit that had been pressed within the last hour. I would find out later that he had come from Lebanon in 1981. He had been waiting for this ceremony for 43 years. His wife was in row 2 behind him, and every time I looked, she was looking at the back of his head with an expression I cannot describe, except to say that I have spent my life wanting somebody to look at the back of my head that way. In row 3, seat 12, there was a young woman, maybe 24, in a hijab the color of a sunrise. Her mother and her 2 sisters were in the row behind her. They had brought a small bouquet of yellow flowers, wrapped in cellophane, that they were not supposed to bring into the building, that security had let them keep anyway, because the guard at the door, Eddie, had taken one look at them and decided he was not going to be the federal employee who took flowers away from a family on the day their daughter became a citizen. In row 5, seat 1, there was a man in a wheelchair. His son, who was maybe 8, was in the seat next to him, holding his father's hand the entire ceremony. I tell you about these people because I want you to understand what I was looking at when the bailiff said, "Please rise." I rose. I placed my hand over my heart. I said the Pledge of Allegiance with 199 other people, and I felt the floor under my feet, the floor I had helped to reinforce, the floor I knew the load capacity of, the floor I had walked at 3 a.m. with a flashlight checking welds, and I felt it hold me. The bailiff said, "Please be seated." I sat. I looked one more time at the empty chair beside me. The small flag was still there. The grandmother's flag, the stranger's flag. And I will tell you what I felt because I want to be honest with you. What I felt was not anger. It was not even sadness, not exactly. What I felt was the quiet, structural sense that something I had been bracing for 25 years had finally collapsed, and that the collapse had been so slow and so quiet that I had not even heard it happen. I felt like a load path that had finally finished failing. And underneath that feeling, and I want you to listen to me, because this is the part I think you came here for, underneath that feeling was a second feeling, which was the feeling of standing in a room I had built, with people who had chosen to be there, on a floor I had checked with my own hands. And nobody in that room had taken me in. Nobody in that room had rescued me. Nobody in that room had made me their project. We were all just there together because we had each decided to be. Director Tavares stood up. She walked to the podium. She is a woman in her late 50s, originally from Lisbon, with short gray hair and the kind of voice that does not need a microphone, but uses one anyway out of respect for the room. She said her welcome. She talked briefly about what citizenship was and what it was not. She did not say the things people usually say. She did not say that we had earned it. She said, instead, that the country was made better every single day by the fact that people kept choosing it. That choice, she said, was the load-bearing wall of the entire idea. I almost laughed when she said that. Load-bearing wall. She had said it on purpose. She knew I was in the room. She said, "Before we begin the oath, I want to do something a little different today. We have, in this room, among our candidates, the civil engineer who led the structural retrofit of this courthouse. She has been part of this building for 3 years. She does not know I am about to do this. Marin Holloway, would you come up here for a minute? I want to tell you that I was prepared." I was not prepared. I had agreed to speak. I had written 2 minutes of remarks on a note card that was in my purse. I had practiced them 3 times in front of my bathroom mirror. None of that mattered. When she said my name, in that room, with the empty chair behind me and the grandmother's flag on it, I felt my legs do the thing my legs had not done since I was 10 years old at the spelling bee, which was almost not hold me up. I stood. I walked to the front of the room. I climbed the 2 steps to the dais. I stood at the podium. I looked out at 200 people who I had never met, and the empty chair in row 4, seat 7, and the grandmother 2 rows back smiling at me like she still didn't know. I want to tell you what I said. I had a note card. I did not use it. I want to tell you what I said, the way I said it, because the words mattered. I said, "Good morning. My name is Marin Holloway. I'm a civil engineer. I helped design the retrofit of this floor. I want to tell you something that I did not know I was going to say until just now. I came to this country when I was 9 years old. I did not choose it. It was chosen for me by people who could not keep me and by people who agreed to take me in. For 25 years, I have understood my place in this country as a gift that somebody else gave me, as something I should be grateful for, as something I had to earn every day by being useful, by being quiet, by being the kind of daughter who did not ask for too much. This morning in my apartment, I almost did not come. I almost stayed home. Because the person I most wanted in this room, the person I reserved a seat for, the person who taught me, when I was 10 years old, how to pronounce the word Worcestershire so that I would not be embarrassed at a spelling bee, that person told me 3 weeks ago that if I did this, I was saying that what she gave me was not enough. I want to say something to that person, even though she is not here. What you gave me was enough to keep me alive when I was 9. I will be grateful for that until the day I die. But what you gave me was never the country. The country was never yours to give. I had to come here and stand on a floor I helped to build and raise my own hand and say the words myself. That is what this is. That is what all of us are about to do. I helped design this floor. I checked the welds, I tested the anchors, I know exactly how much weight this room can hold. I want all of you to know that the room is built to hold us, all 200 of us, together, at the same time. The math works. I checked it myself. I want to tell you that I stopped talking then. I stepped back from the podium. I walked back to my seat in row 4. I sat down next to the empty chair. I picked up the small paper flag the grandmother had left on it, and I held it in my hand, and I did not cry, even though, around me, in row 1 and row 3 and row 5, several people I had never met before were crying for me. Director Tavares said, "Thank you, Marin." She paused. She said, "Now, candidates, please rise. Raise your right hand." I rose. I raised my right hand. I said the oath of allegiance to the country I had chosen, in a building I had helped to build, on a floor I knew by heart. And when it was over, when the bailiff said, "Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen, you are now citizens of the United States," and the room erupted in the sound of 200 people who had each, in their own way, walked a road I will not pretend to fully understand, I sat down. I sat down in row 4, seat 8. I looked at the empty chair beside me. The flag was still there. I did not move it. I want to tell you what happened after the ceremony, because the moment that follows is the one I think about most. Hugo was waiting for me in the hallway outside the ceremony room. He had not been allowed inside. Guests had their own seating area in the back, and he had been pacing the corridor for 90 minutes. When I came out, he did not say anything. He just walked up to me and he put his hand on the back of my neck the way he does, and he preferred Esther against mine for about 4 seconds. And then he stepped back and he said, "You spoke." I said, "I spoke." He said, "What did you say?" I said, the math works." He laughed. He laughed so hard that a woman walking by with her family turned around and looked at us, and then she smiled, because she could not help it. We went outside. It was a cold, bright May morning in Hartford. There were people taking photographs on the steps of the courthouse, families, grandmothers, children with small paper flags. I sat down on the granite bench outside the main entrance, the bench I had specified in the procurement document 3 years before, and I took out my phone. I had 17 missed calls. 12 of them were from Piper. 2 of them were from a number I did not recognize, which I would later find out was Pastor Linwood Gage. There were no calls from my mother. There was, however, one text from her, sent at 10:47 a.m., 17 minutes after I had raised my right hand. It said, "I hope you got what you wanted." I read it. I read it again. I did not reply. Hugo sat down next to me on the bench. He looked at my phone. He read the text. He said, "Don't answer that today." I said I wasn't going to. He said, "Good." I said, "Hugo, there's something I want to do, and I want you to drive me." He said, "Anywhere." I said, "I want to go to Ashford." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm sure. I'm not going to talk to her. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I just want to put something on the porch. I want to tell you what I put on the porch." We drove from Hartford to Ashford. 26 minutes. I had stopped at a CVS on the way. I had bought a roll of brown packing paper and a black Sharpie. In the parking lot of the CVS, I had taken the green shoebox out of my bag. I had brought it with me that morning, on a hunch I had not yet articulated to myself, and I had wrapped it in the brown paper. On the front of the package, with the Sharpie, I had written one word, Worcestershire. I spelled it the way she had taught me. Worcester, sheer, sauce, 3 lines, just the syllables. We pulled up in front of the Ashford house at 12:58 in the afternoon. Hugo stayed in the car. I walked up the front path. I set the box on the welcome mat. I did not knock. I did not ring the bell. I did not look in the window. I walked back to the car. We drove away. I do not know when she found the box. I do not know if she opened it. I do not know if she understood. I have a guess, but I will not share my guess, because I have decided that what she did with that box is the only part of this story that does not belong to me. I want to tell you what happened over the next 4 weeks, because the consequences move through that small town the way water moves through a system designed for it. The first thing that happened was that Pastor Linwood Gage's wife, Marcy, called me on the Tuesday after the ceremony. She had been the one in the fellowship hall. She had been the one who said Lorraine's name out loud when I walked in. I had not heard from her in 8 years. She said on the phone, very quietly, "Marin, I want to apologize to you for not stopping her sooner. I have known your mother for 20 years. I have known you for 25. I should have said something the first time she called this house, and I did not. I am sorry. I said, Marcy, thank you. She said, I'm going to ask you something, and you can say no. There is a young woman in our congregation. Her name is Yusra. She's from Eritrea. She came here last year, and she is starting the citizenship process. I would like to introduce the two of you. Not for any reason except that I think you would be good for her to know. I said yes. The second thing that happened was that 2 weeks after the ceremony, the spring food drive at First Presbyterian, which Lorraine had been running for 11 years, was quietly handed over to a different woman in the congregation. The reasons given publicly were that Lorraine was tired and needed a break. The third thing that happened was that Pastor Gage himself called me. He asked if he could come to New Haven. He drove down on a Thursday afternoon. We sat at the coffee shop on Chapel Street, where I had filed my N-400 16 months earlier. He ordered a black coffee. I ordered tea. He sat across from me and he said, Marin, I want to tell you that what your mother said in the fellowship hall and what she has said in other rooms in this church over the last several months has reached me. I want to tell you that I have spoken with her about it. I am not going to share what was said. I am going to tell you that I think you have been carrying something for a very long time that was never yours to carry. I do not know if she will ever be able to say to you what she should say. But I want to say to you, on behalf of a congregation that watched you grow up and did not always see you clearly, that we see you now. And I am sorry. I did not cry in front of Pastor Gage. I cried in the parking lot afterward in my car with my hands on the steering wheel for 20 minutes. The fourth thing that happened, and this is the thing I want to slow down for, was that 6 weeks after the ceremony, on a Wednesday evening, I was leaving Hugo's office in New Haven when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost did not pick up. I picked up. It was my stepfather, Dale. He says, Marin, it's me. Are you at home? I said, I'm in my car. I'm headed home. Why? He said, I'm in your driveway. I drove the last 14 minutes from Hugo's office to my apartment in New Haven the way you drive when you do not yet know what is going to be asked of you. I drove the speed limit. I did not turn on the radio. I noticed as I drove that my hands were not shaking, which surprised me because they had shaken every time I had spoken to my mother on the phone for the last 6 weeks. I do not know why my hands did not shake when Dale called. I think it is because Dale, in his way, has been shaking for 40 years on behalf of all of us, and somebody has to be the one who does not. I pulled into the driveway. His pickup truck was parked behind my mailbox. He was sitting on the front step of my building, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking down at his shoes. He looked up when I got out of the car. He stood up. He did not move toward me. I walked to him. We stood about 3 feet apart on the sidewalk. He said, Can I come up? I said, yes. We went upstairs. I made coffee. Because that is what you do when Dale is in your kitchen. I set a mug in front of him. He held it in both hands but did not drink it. He said, Your mother does not know I am here. I said, okay. He said, I'm not going to ask you to forgive her. I am not going to tell you what she has been doing for the last 6 weeks. I am not going to defend her. I have done all three of those things in this life more times than I can count, and I am not doing them tonight. I said, okay. He said, I want to tell you something I should have told you when you were 12. And then I want to tell you something I should have told you 4 weeks ago. And I will say it now because I have not been able to sleep through one full night since. I sat down across from him. I did not interrupt. He said, When you were 12 years old, your mother told me, in this kitchen, well, not this kitchen, the kitchen at home, that she did not know how to love you the way she loved Piper. She said it like a confession. She said it like she was sorry. And I want to tell you that what I said back to her, what I said to my own wife in our own kitchen when she told me that was, try harder. That is what I said, try harder. Like she was a kid doing a math problem. I never said it again. I never followed up. I never asked her 10 years later, or 15 years later, or 20 years later, whether she had tried, or whether trying had worked, or whether you were paying for the fact that she could not. I let her run the family, and I went to the garage. For 22 years, Marin, I went to the garage. He stopped. He picked up the coffee. He drank half of it in one swallow. He said, The second thing I want to tell you is that on the morning of your ceremony, I was already dressed. I had on my one suit, the blue one. I had your invitation card in my breast pocket. I had put it there the night before. I came downstairs at 7:30 and your mother was at the table in her bathrobe and she said to me, You are not going. And I said, Lore. And she said, if you go, you are saying she is right. And she is not right. And I want to tell you, Marin, that I stood in the kitchen for about 30 seconds. And then I took the invitation card out of my breast pocket and I put it on the table and I went back upstairs and changed into my jeans. I want to tell you that I knew, while I was changing my pants, that I was making the worst decision of my life. And I made it anyway. Because for 38 years, I have been a man who, when his wife says do not go, does not go. I am sorry, Marin. I am the one who taught you by example that the way to belong in this family was to do what she said. I taught you that. I am the one who taught you that. And I have to live with it. I did not say anything for a long time. I drank some of my own coffee. I looked at the kitchen table. I looked at the man across from it. I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" He said, "Because I was watching the news last week, and they were running a piece about the Hartford courthouse retrofit. And they had a clip of the building, and the reporter said your name. And I was sitting in my recliner, alone, and I realized that I have lived with you for 25 years, and I did not know what you did for a living. I knew you were an engineer. I did not know what you built. I did not know what your hands had touched. And I sat there in my recliner and I thought, that's my daughter, that's my daughter. And then I thought, no, she isn't. Not really. Not in the way that matters. Because being a daughter is not just somebody calling you dad, it's also somebody being a father. And I was not a father to you, Marin. I was a man who lived in the same house. I said, Dale. He said, I'm not asking for anything. I want to be very clear with you. I am not asking you to call. I am not asking you to come home. I am not asking you to talk to your mother. I am telling you, because I owe you the telling, that I knew the whole time. And I did nothing. And I am sorry. We sat in my kitchen for another 40 minutes. He did not cry. I did not cry. We talked about other things. He told me he had retired from the lumberyard. He told me he had started learning, by himself in the garage, how to refinish furniture. He told me he had been thinking about taking a class. I told him about Hugo. I had never told him about Hugo. I had been with Hugo for 2 years. When he left, he stood in the doorway and he said, Marin, one more thing. I won't ask again. But your mother is not well. I am not asking you to fix it. I am not asking you to call. I am asking you to know. I said, thank you for telling me. He said, good night, sweetheart. He went down the stairs. I heard his truck start. I heard him drive away. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour. Hugo came over at 10. I told him everything. He listened. He did not give me advice. At the end, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do nothing. For a while, I want to do nothing. He said, okay. I did nothing for 6 weeks. I went to work. I finished the retrofit project. I started a new one, a pedestrian bridge in Bridgeport. I had dinner with Hugo 3 nights a week. I called my biological father in Cape Town for the first time in 2 years, and then again 2 weeks later, and then again 2 weeks after that. I started a slow, careful correspondence with Yusra, the young woman from Eritrea who Marcy had introduced me to. I helped her with her N400 over coffee on Saturdays. I did not call my mother. She did not call me. And then, on a Thursday evening in late June, I stopped by First Presbyterian after work. I had not been to that church in 8 months. I do not know exactly why I went. I told myself I was returning a hymnal I had borrowed in college and never returned, which was technically true but was not the real reason. The real reason, I think, is that some part of me had decided it was time to know what was happening to her, and the only way I knew how was to go where she would be. Choir practice ended at 7. I waited in the parking lot until the doors opened and the women started coming out. I watched her come out alone. She walked across the lot to her car. She got in. She did not start it. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the wheel. After about a minute, she lowered her head. I could see, from across the parking lot, in the yellow light of the street lamp, that her shoulders were moving, not performance. She did not know I was there. I sat in my car for a long time. Then I got out. I walked across the parking lot. I knocked on her window. She looked up. She saw me. She did not wipe her eyes. She rolled down the window. She said, I taught you that word. That was all she said. 5 words, past tense, subject, verb, object. The cleanest sentence I had ever heard her speak. I said, I know, Mom. She said, I taught you that word, Marin. I said, I know. We did not say anything else. I stood there for about a minute. She put her forehead down against the steering wheel. I reached through the open window, and I put my hand on her shoulder for about 4 seconds. Then I took my hand back. I walked back to my car. I drove home. I have not seen her in person since. She has called twice. I have not answered. I have not blocked her number. The door is open 1 inch. Not wide enough to walk through, but not locked. I have decided that what I need from her is not one sentence. It is 10 years of behavior. I do not know if she has 10 years of behavior in her. I do not know if I have 10 years of waiting in me. I have not decided. I do not have to decide today. That is what restraint looks like, in case you have ever wondered. I want to tell you what my life looks like now in specific terms, because vague resolutions are a lie, and I told you at the beginning I would be honest with you. I am still a civil engineer. I am still in New Haven. The Bridgeport pedestrian bridge opened in March. I led the design. My name is on a small bronze plaque at the south end. I walked across the bridge by myself the morning before the ribbon cutting, at 6:30 in the morning, alone, and I tested the deflection of the center span with my own body weight, which is something I have done with every bridge I have ever built, and which I will not stop doing as long as I am able to walk. Hugo and I got married last fall. We did it at the courthouse in Hartford, the same courthouse. We did not invite anybody from Ashford. We invited Hugo's mother, Esperanza, and his two brothers, and Marcy Gage and Yusra and her family, and Director Tavares and Eddie the security guard, who came in his street clothes and brought his daughter home from college for the day. We had lunch afterward at a Vietnamese place on State Street. There were 16 of us. It was the right number. My biological father came over from Cape Town for 2 weeks in October. He stayed at our apartment. We did not have one big conversation. We had a lot of small ones. He is 73. He is tired. He told me, on the last night of his trip, sitting on our couch, that he had spent 40 years carrying the weight of a decision he made when he was 33 and did not have another plan. I told him that I forgave him for the plane ticket. He cried. I cried. We ate cold leftovers. He flew home the next morning. Piper has called me 4 times in the last year. The first time I did not answer. The second time I didn't answer. The third time I did. She said she did not know what to say. I said I knew. We talked for 9 minutes about her job. We have talked since then about once every 6 weeks. We are not close. We are not strangers. I do not know what we are. I have decided that not knowing is fine. Dale and I have lunch every other Sunday. He drives down to New Haven. He has not asked me to come back to Ashford. He has not mentioned my mother more than 3 or 4 times in 18 months. He has refinished 6 pieces of furniture. He has given me 2 of them. There is a small side table in my living room that he stripped and stained himself. It is the most beautiful object in my apartment. I look at it most days. Lorraine and I have not spoken in 14 months. She sends a card on my birthday. She sent one at Christmas. I read them. I do not respond. The door is still open 1 inch. I want to tell you about one more thing, and then I will let you go. In April of this year, Hugo's mother, Esperanza, decided at the age of 68 to renew her commitment to her citizenship in a small ceremony that she organized herself. She is already a citizen. She has been a citizen for 16 years. But she told us at dinner one night that the year she was sworn in, she had been too overwhelmed to really feel any of it. She wanted to do it again, on her own terms. With her own people, she rented out the back room of a small Honduran restaurant in West Haven. She invited about 40 people. She asked Hugo to administer a private ceremonial repeat of the oath, which is not legally meaningful, but which is, if you are Esperanza Alarcón, deeply meaningful in every other way. She asked me to bring something to put on a chair. I asked her what kind of thing. She said, "You'll know." The night of the ceremony, I went into my closet and I took down a small box I had not opened in 8 months. Inside the box was a single small American flag, the one Hugo had brought to my own ceremony, the one I had kept. I drove to the restaurant. I sat in the front row. There was a chair in row 2, seat 1, that was empty. The chair was reserved for Esperanza's sister, who had passed away 3 years before, in Honduras, without ever making it to the United States. Before the ceremony began, I walked to the back of the room. I picked up the small flag from my purse. I walked to row 2, seat 1. I placed the flag on the chair. I sat back down. Esperanza raised her right hand. Hugo administered the oath. Esperanza repeated the words. When she was done, she did not sit back down. She turned around and looked at row 2, seat 1. She looked at the small flag I had placed there. She said, in front of her son and her brothers and her friends, "She made it. She made it through me. Today she is here." She walked to row 2, seat 1. She picked up the small flag. She held it against her chest. She sat down in the chair next to it. I want you to understand what I felt watching that. I felt my mother, not Lorraine, my biological mother, the one who died when I was the one whose face I have lost almost entirely, the one whose voice I cannot remember. I felt her in the room. I felt her in row 2. I felt her in the empty chair. I felt her in the flag. I felt for the first time in 27 years that I had not been given away. I had been carried. And I want to say this to you, and then I will stop talking. I spent 25 years trying to be hers. The day I stopped, I finally became mine. If you are the one in your family who has spent your whole life trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built to hold you, I am not going to tell you to leave the table. I am not going to tell you to break the dishes. I am not going to tell you to scream. I am going to tell you this. Somewhere in the world, there is a room that you helped to build. There is a floor whose load capacity you know by heart. There is a chair in row 2 that is waiting for you to put a flag on it. There is a woman, maybe a stranger, maybe somebody you have not met yet, who is going to sit in that chair and who is going to look at the flag and who is going to know that you put it there. And that is what belonging is. Belonging is not being taken in. Belonging is being the person who eventually takes somebody else in. That is the math. I checked it myself. If you have ever had to choose between being someone's daughter and being yourself, tell me below. And tell me if you chose right, because I still don't know if I did. I just know that I chose myself. And I know that on a cold morning in May, in a building I had helped to build, on a floor I knew by heart, I stood up. I raised my right hand, I said the words, and nobody took me in. I walked in, on my own 2 feet, the way I should have walked in 25 years ago. That is the whole story. Thank you for sitting with me through it. I'm Marin. Take care of yourselves out there.